episode 11 of Strange Brow Radio. It is I, your host, Tobe Johnson, from the bowels of Pacific Northwest. Underneath the waning full moon, it is spring, the equinox, a convergence of all three. If you weren't privy to that in mid-March, shame on you. It's good to be back. Today we have author, researcher, experiencer, and some secret background that we won't get into. Sig Sigurdson. That's his pen name we're using, and that's how we're going to conduct the interview. So, I'll tell you more about that in a moment, but thank you again to our sponsor, Feral by Aaron, ERYN at Etsy.com. Check out all the gear. Well, it's not gear, it's museum quality spirit tools. Feral by Aaron, ERYN at Etsy.com. Stay in your seat, or you can stand. Just listen up to this little ditty with author experiencer Sig Sigurdson. We'll be right back. Author experiencer Sig Sigurdson has been prone to strange occurrences. As an experiencer, someone who interacts with the unusual and paranormal throughout his life, in mid-March 2019, the day was no different. So what you're about to hear starts off with a description of a man in black type outside of his door. And I say that because of the inside knowledge that he had along the way. But maybe it wasn't a man in black. Maybe it was something else. It's a pretty disturbing interaction. And it goes into some detail about what this man looked like and the knowledge he had and what he had dripping from his mouth and nose. And then we just go down the rabbit hole as usual with Sig. So, long overdue. My talk one evening with Sig Sigurdson. We have on air with us Sig Sigurdson, and we'll just say he's from an undisclosed location somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. And last night I got a text about midnight regarding an incident that isn't very unfamiliar to you, but it's been a while since you've had an encounter with what we would call the men in black or the men in plaid. And if anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, you can take a look at some previous episodes of Strange Brow live events and follow up on that. And I'll explain more about why I'm so cryptic about that at a later date. But on the phone with us right now is Mr. Sigurdson. So tell us, at least tell me, what happened, and maybe just start from the beginning.
Well, you can call me Sig. And, so basically, my neighbors on both sides of me have reported ghostly goings on. There are a lot more suicides in my neighborhood than most neighborhoods. This area used to be a forest, actually. Portland, Oregon, where I'm calling from, used to be called Stumptown. And the reason why is it was a big forest, and then they cut everything down. And then, so there are all those stumps around. And it just so happens that my cottage is the oldest building within at least a mile radius of here. And we're talking about a fairly dense residential area. And so this neighborhood, is known for having hauntings, ghosts, and stuff like that. I have a different way of looking at ghosts from most people. I don't see them as being the spirits or souls of people who have passed on. I see them as being something very different from that. But people around me see them in that way, that they interpret them in that way. And so ghost stories on both sides of my house. I've had roommates and girlfriends living in my house have experiences with ghosts. I haven't really had a lot of ghostly experiences in this house. It's mainly other people, actually. And but back in 2008, I had an experience that was a life-changing experience in the California redwoods that involved an encounter I had with some men in plaid. And after that, it was about a year later. Let's see, or was it the next summer? It's been so long. I have to work that out on the calendar. It's funny because the internet, with emails, you can figure these things out. Like I actually figured out which year the MIPs. I had the MIP encounter by some emails that I knew some things that had happened before that. So that's how I narrowed it down because I didn't keep a journal or diary at the time. Well, then
Well,
it was either the summer
let's
after that
hold on a
winter.
second. Hold on a
Yeah,
second.
yeah, yeah,
Let's stop.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let's start with what the MIPs were, just for people that haven't heard this conversation. We're talking about men in black type figures, but they were just wearing plaid clothing. And so describe
Not
a
at
little.
all. Not at
Okay.
all. They weren't men in plaid type. They weren't men in black type figures. Now, the one I saw yesterday was a men in black type figure. I've encountered both of these kinds of beings. The other ones were more like Nordics, and they were, in a small compact vehicle, and they reacted to a Bigfoot callback that I got from out in this river where I was. At the time, I thought it was a swamp, though, because one of the things I've learned from Bigfooting is not to really obsess on maps. Obviously you can't get lost in a dangerous way, but if you kind of control chaos a bit and you're not literally aware of exactly where you are, that works in the favor of supernatural events happening, especially if you get a little edgy or nervous or something, you're feeling uncomfortable. That tends to facilitate encounters, I've found. And so back in that time, I don't do that anymore, but back in those days, I was looking for as many encounters as I could find, and I put a lot of work into it. I was going out in the woods from 2000 to 2010, 2008 actually. A couple things dribbled over into 2010, but a huge amount of experiences happened because I basically went into the woods and into hot spots, all the time, every time I could. And I was an online teacher, so I had a lot of time that was flexible. I could maneuver my work week around when I needed to be going out there, having to do with the weather and other things, because I always found that more activity tended to happen in, fairly good weather. So I don't know why that would be, but, I did a lot of bigfooting in cold, miserable weather, and not nearly as much generally tended to happen in that weather to me. But we're talking about logging it over years. We're talking about hundreds of trips, many with other people and some by myself. And so I had this encounter with these men in plaid, and it was life-changing. I don't want to go into it now, but it involved, some pretty hairy things that happened to me in terms of, I don't want to go into it at this time. But anyway, it involved more than just simply a sighting, I'll say. And the Bigfoot encounter actually dribbled away. When the MIPs showed up, the Bigfoot retreated across what I thought was the swamp. It was a river, though. Then the following summer, it was either that summer or the summer after. I think it was that summer. I was walking my dog, and two very different-looking Nordics were in my neighborhood. Now, it's possible that they were just long blonde-haired people. I mean, they were thin, not nearly as muscular as the ones that I thought I saw in the car. Those two were more muscular, short hair, almost like a light brown hair. These guys had blonde hair, and it was long, and they were both tall. I'd say they were both about 6'2" in height. I never got super close to them. I was walking my dog, who was a Basenji, and she was a very unusual dog, didn't bark, Egyptian breed, a very ancient Egyptian breed. And these guys basically just started trying to approach me, and I thought they were trying to mug me because I didn't think Nordics at the time. To my closest recollection, they were wearing plaid shirts, and they tried to approach me, and I just sensed, if someone approaches you when you're walking your dog like that, it feels invasive, like they might want to rob you. It didn't seem friendly. And so my dog and I actually avoided by going to different streets. And so we retreated to another street. Then they would show up at the base of that street a block away and start coming toward me. And then I go the other way. And then this went on maybe 3 to 4 times. And I actually was concerned enough that I actually purchased protection after that for walking my dog, even though nothing really happened after that. And so I've seen men in plaid in my neighborhood. That was a long time ago. That was 2008, possibly 2009. This was more of a men in black situation, but the guy was not wearing black. He was wearing kind of a gray coat, and I think khaki slacks. And my dog started barking. I was out moving the garbage out in front of my house, and this guy had this goofy grin on his face, and he was staring at me in a way that was unnerving. I was just like, at the time, I didn't think supernatural at all. Are you still there,
Yeah, I'm still
Toby?
here. Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, okay. I didn't think supernatural at all at the time, but my dog, was out in the street. I was trying to get my dog out of the street, and the guy had like his face was running like a faucet. Like I've never seen snot like that in all my life, or drool. It was like a watery discharge. Not as viscous as phlegm or saliva, and it was pouring out of the corners of his mouth and out of both nostrils and coming down his face. And I just immediately my detector went up. I was like, this guy is very sick. He's got something that could be contagious. I want to keep my dog away from him. And he just started, the first thing he said was, he started commenting on my selling my house. And I haven't told anyone that I'm going to sell my house in the neighborhood. So I was just shocked that he would know that. And he said it in passing. He kind of said, I don't know why you'd want to sell this house. I just love a 2-story house. I have a friend, and he listed some address. So he's got a 2-story house. It's a really great house. The 2-story houses, they're just, and he just started going on and on about all this stuff. And when I first saw him, I thought that he would maybe have some kind of mental disability that made him so he couldn't even speak very plainly, but he spoke fine. It's just that what he was saying made no sense. I couldn't understand where he was going with it. And so my dog kept wanting to sniff his leg. And so I started yelling at my dog because I felt like there was a biohazard possibly with this guy. And so my dog did back off when I yelled at my dog. But when I yelled, it like nonplussed the guy, and he became a little disoriented by my yelling. I wasn't yelling that loud, but it was almost as though he wasn't used to anyone ever yelling, ever, even to their dog, or if their dog's out in the street. Like, I was worried my dog could be hit. So that kind of threw him off, but then he started approaching me onto my property, and I just said right there, I said, I don't understand. I have no idea what you're talking about. And then this made him stop. And then I said, what did I say on that? I said, I just basically said some nice closing comment. Take care. That's what I said. I said, take care. And he said, oh, it was like he realized, oh, this is, you say take care when something's over. And then he kind of robotically turned and walked out to the side of the street and started walking, kind of ambling, almost like kind of waddling or ambling away from the house. So that's what happened.
So you how close to this guy?
I'd say I was probably about 7 feet.
Oh, you were super
6
close.
feet.
So the drool and the viscous fluid, all that stuff, you could see plainly, and it wasn't.
It wasn't viscous. That's the weird thing. It was watery.
Okay.
It wasn't viscous.
It wasn't
And
viscous.
it was just pouring out. Now, so I came in and I told my wife about this. My wife actually, she hadn't really had anything supernatural happen to her until she started hanging out with me. And then I took her to some places with a lot of activity. We went to a place up on the Clackamas, and she actually had a Bigfoot sighting. I didn't, but she did. And so, then she's been in the house when there have been bumps in the attic that sound a little bit too substantial for, I don't know, something on the roof or something. It sounds like it's in the attic. And that's the typical kind of stuff that my other girlfriend heard too. And it got very upset, and she would sage when she heard that. And so, she's been around some supernatural stuff since she's been my girlfriend. And we're engaged, so it's working out well. And so she said, well, what you're describing sounds unlikely. I wonder if it could have been fluid from his brain. She's in the medical industry, so she listed the actual term for brain fluid or something like that. She said that would be less viscous like that.
Yeah,
And
cerebral
she
spinal
said,
fluid, right? CSF.
yes, right,
Yeah.
yeah. And she said that if that were leaking out at that rate, he'd be dead, within an hour. I even think like if it was just saliva and snot, that I don't know how you could lose that much bodily fluid that fast. I mean, it was really coming out. And then she said to me something I thought was interesting. She said, "Well, was there any on the ground, and what were his clothes covered in it?" And I honestly couldn't remember seeing anything on the ground or on his coat, which is odd because. So the thing is, if it just started leaking right before he talked to me, then that might make sense because there was obviously a little there, but it wasn't as though it had been leaking that much as he was walking down the street for an hour or something like that, or however long he'd been. It seemed as though it had just started, but I don't know. That's how it seemed because there wasn't a huge amount all over his coat.
Well, let's go back to the reading of the mind. If there's a no for sale sign and there's no mention of it via, an internet source, how would this guy know that your house is for sale, and why would he be so conversational about it?
Yeah. Well, my fiance had a theory about that. She said, "Oh, he's one of the spirits in the house. He manifested." And we have this kind of like running joke or kind of a dreadful joke that the house is trying to keep me from moving. And so I can say that, I've been trying to move out of this house for years, and I got really serious about it last October, or right around Thanksgiving, actually, is when I really started putting it in full gear. I met with a realtor. I did all this stuff. Boom. And then I don't want to say what happened, but something happened that would have, well, I don't want to go into it, but it was a devastating event in my life, and it could have prevented me from moving. And so it's just been a comedy of errors, or horrible, like the dark comedy of errors. And so she, said she's like, "Oh, the house doesn't want us to move," and this guy kind of fit in that mental trajectory because, like, he basically what he was saying was trying to kind of in a roundabout way convince me not to move. You know, saying the house is beautiful and why would you want to move? He basically said that. So, um,
Well, there's no explanation for why a guy would be so conversational about a house for sale that's really not on the market.
it's absolutely not on the market. No one knows about it. The neighbor straight across from me, I said I was thinking about it, but I didn't say I was. So, and I've never seen that guy before. I've lived here for many, many years, and he's not. I don't recognize him from the neighborhood, and yeah, it was. I would say, even though he wasn't wearing a black suit or a black hat, that he was a definite MIB type.
But this isn't
But
this is
and there again, I didn't think about that until my fiance said that he seemed supernatural and that he was basically manifesting with the house. He was a physical manifestation of the house, is what she said.
and this is not your only encounter in the last 6 months, at least as far as I know. you told me an event that happened with your fiance up in the Clackamas area, we'll call it, where you guys ran into somebody that was really out of place coming out of the woods. Describe that moment.
Yeah, well, that was pretty unusual. Yeah, we saw this individual come up this bank that was incredibly steep, and it did sound as though he was pulling himself up, but he sounded much larger than what we saw. What we saw was a guy who was maybe 5'9". He had kind of like silky, well kept, very healthy looking hair that was shoulder length. Um, he had on kind of an unusual shirt. I've never seen a shirt quite like that. It had seams that were kind of showed that it was kind of like a t-shirt, but it wasn't exactly a t-shirt. It I've never seen a shirt like it actually before. Um, I don't want to describe the exact, because I'm going to write about this. I don't want to describe the exact stuff that was on the shirt, but there was a strange thing on the back of the shirt, a graphic that was just really odd and very, very pronounced, and that had kind of a meaning to my fiance and I. And he was carrying a huge stick on his shoulder over his, I believe, right shoulder, the shoulder away from us. And he just ambled down the road. And I had actually, like, I was never into crystal anything. Like, I think, stone crystals, I kind of dabbled a little bit, like, just as almost a joke. I brought some quartz crystals necklaces when I would go bigfooting back in the early 2000s. Just I thought, why not? If this has any possibility, at that time I was just trying to generate, anything I could, and so I just threw that like the kitchen sink into the mix. But I didn't place a lot of stock in the crystals. But I just had this strong urge, like that afternoon before the sighting, early afternoon, which was right before dusk when we had the sighting. But we went into town. My fiance loves coffee. We got some coffee for her and some other stuff, and we ended up in this stone store in the town there, and they had all kinds of curios and rare stones. And I ended up selecting a quartz sphere that was about the size of half again bigger than a golf ball, I'd say, and clear. And so I took this up there and just sort of like, I didn't really expect anything to happen, but I just floated out essentially what could amount to a contract. When I think about it in retrospect, it was like a contract. And I just said, if you show, because we were having activity there, I said, if you show yourself, then I'd be happy to give you this sphere, and I will give you this sphere if you show yourself, And then I went over and I put it on this log. Well, right before the guy showed himself, my fiance was talking about that very log. She's like, I thought you put some soap over on that log. And by the way, where's the sphere? Didn't you put that on the log? And we'd gone for a hike, and I put it in the car just, for while we hiked. I didn't want to leave it out in case, someone came by. I think one car came by the whole day, though. And it was the 4th of July. So, that was, you'd think there'd be more cars, but there weren't a lot of cars up there, even though it was the 4th. And so then at dusk, right when she said that, my dog started barking, and up comes the guy up this like ridiculously steep bank on the other side of the road. And I just described his presence like that of a rock star. I mean, he was absolutely charismatic. I mean, I would say if you put that guy next to Jim Morrison back in the day, this guy would be more charismatic. And I can't describe why. He just had this air about him that was so intimidating. I tried to videotape the guy, and I had my phone, and I thought, and I saw it. It was videotaping him. I saw my phone. I can look on the screen, as I'm filming him. Well, as soon as he went out of view, my phone blinked, and it started videotaping right then, and I didn't touch any buttons. And I was like, oh my God, I was so mad. I didn't tape the guy. And as soon as he saw me filming him, he looked the other way and he wouldn't turn his face to us. But before that, he did look over at us, so we saw his face. But then, as soon as we were and I just remember at the time, I didn't think he was supernatural until afterwards, like we started putting two and two together. And man, that was weird. And then, so what was also strange is as soon as it started taping, it formed this like whirlpool of like smear of like circular smear of color of things it was photographing. It starts out with like this whirlpool of, I don't know, I can't describe it. It's just, I've never seen it on my phone before. So, and that was on the frozen screen on my phone. So it was like this swirling mandala of photographic imagery. So it was kind of weird.
Right.
That was
And what were
that
his
was the 4th of July.
what were his clothes like coming down a rocky or
He
coming
had
up
like
a rock?
linen pants on, like it looked like from the 1930s, like linen style pants. I've never seen pants like linen. It's just unusual. And then his shoes were, I didn't get a good look at his shoes. My fiance got a good look at his shoes. Got a look at his shoes, and she said they were like sort of like tennis shoes, but they weren't tennis shoes, and she couldn't identify exactly what they were. And then later on, we sat there for 10 minutes, and then I'm like, and then she reminded me of my offer I'd made about or no, she didn't. That was later. Then she's just basically convinced me the guy could have been supernatural. And then I jumped in my car at that point, and I went, and ironically, I drove as far as this place where my friend, this guy named John, had actually photographed a Bigfoot print there. And I didn't know that, because that was a weird thing. The very next weekend, we were hanging out with friends, and John was there, and he told us this story of how he had seen a Bigfoot right there. I was like floored, like, what are the chances of that, you know? And I described the pull out, and he's like, oh yeah, people put like refrigerators there and shoot them and all. I'm like, yeah, that's the exact spot. I mean, I just couldn't believe it's like a makeshift gun range there, you know? And so I turned around there. I drove about a mile and a half down the road, turned around, came back, and the guy was nowhere to be seen, and there were no campsites up there. And it was like a straight up and down bank on one side, and and then just basically a drop off, sheer cliffs in places, and down into this valley, and kind of a very severe place, but with lots of red or cedar trees and lots of moss, and very rainforesty, you know, even for Oregon. And so then I went back to camp, and by then it's dark. And my fiance is like, I don't know if we should stay here tonight, you know. And so we packed up, and as we're driving out, there's this stick right across the road, just up from where I turned around. It's lying straight across the road. And I photographed the stick, and then we went back there a couple of weeks later, and I matched it to this right where he'd come up the bank. There was one of the switches were broken off. It was the same diameter as that stick. And so it was just weird to see that he'd laid the stick horizontally perpendicular, just straight across the road. You know, so we had to drive over it. And as I was driving over it, I just had this feeling like I'm driving over like this magical thing, or like staff, or magician's staff, or whatever. It just felt weird. And then we got a long way down the road. We got all the way down the highway, the paved part, and then I said to my fiance, I'm like, so what are the chances that that guy was supernatural? Because she has this thing where it's part of her job where she has to like categorize statistics all day for her medical job she has. So she likes to, you know, categorize, which really isn't that different from a lot of the sciences these days. They kind of just throw out these statistics. They kind of just pull them out of their shorts, you know, a lot of the time, and make it seem all official. But so, like, you know, it was just her opinion. It wasn't scientific. So she goes, 85%. And I was just like, 85%? Really? That high? She's like, yeah. There's just too many factors. 85, maybe 90. And I'm like thinking, oh man, I got to bring that sphere back then because I made a promise. So I went back there, and I get out, and I hear what sounded to me like bipedal walking in these dried leaves down by this creek, right near where I had left the sphere. And I just made an announcement. I'm like, hey, I'm making good on my promise. Here it is. Here's the sphere, And I said it there, and then I got the hell out of there. But it sounded like three. It sounded like three or four bipedal thing. It didn't sound like deer or elk. I mean, I've heard deer or elk, 100 times. It didn't sound like that. It sounded bipedal to me. And actually, you and I went to that same spot a month earlier, and we found some really weird relics there that had been carved. Remember that?
Yeah, I still have the what you're describing is a homemade vampire steak that says
I know.
it says vampire with a Y on the side of it.
I know. Which is actually a little bookish because you'll know, like Polidori, the friend of Mary Shelley and Percy Bysshe Shelley. I mean, that's how he spelled it in his story about the vampire, his poem.
I
It
didn't
used
know
to
that.
be spelled Y-R-E.
Well, that night too that we were there, we only stayed one night, but there are a couple interesting things that you recalled happening that night because we made note of it, and that would have been around, I don't know, 10:30 at night, and near the brackish swamp that I was hanging my hammock, and I don't know how you were sleeping that evening, but before we went to bed, we heard bipedal walking on the edge of the swamp going perpendicular to where we were, and the
Yeah, I remember that.
rain was flecking down, and then we saw little red lights, just little tiny
Yeah.
laser small pinpricks of light, and one was right over your right shoulder, and I think you remember said, yeah, I saw that too. And
Now,
then
see, you told me about the pinpricks, and I appear not to have a memory of that. I don't doubt you in the least,
Mhm.
but I just can't remember that. I remember. I don't know. Maybe I can, but it wasn't that long ago. It's odd that and then you mentioned it not that long after. Maybe was it a month later, and I couldn't remember it. Remember that?
Right.
So it's
Well,
very odd. I don't doubt you in the least. I'm just saying that when you're around the supernatural,
mhm.
this can happen, especially when you sleep there.
When you go back to the clothing that he sounds like Yanni coming up the mountain there. You saw a man in
Not that long. His hair wasn't that long.
no.
It was a little shorter than that, and it was just, he looked impeccably groomed. I mean, that's the weird thing, is that he looked so clean. He had just come up a bank that the average person would be covered in dirt. It was actually a rocky substrate, but would be covered in dirt coming up that bank.
Is this the
An
ravine?
average
Is this the
person.
ravine where Risa had her encounter?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
All right. Okay.
This is just down by the main road there, and
Okay.
by the culvert. And
Okay.
let me tell you, man, that is. I tried to go down there to touch the sapling that he had snapped off, and and I hurt myself. I started sliding down. I mean, an average person. I would have slid all the way to the bottom and seriously injured myself because it's down about 40 feet. If I hadn't hit the exact sapling with my foot and stopped myself from sliding down, that guy snapped off. So it's still about 6 feet tall. That's another thing. I could reach up to the top of it where it was snapped off, but why would anyone in their right mind snap it off that high up? I mean, it's like, I think it could have been a Sasquatch that we saw, And ironically, my novel, Cultists, describes that very type of thing. Them throwing different images that people see, I can't tell you how many times I've been driving up by Mount Adams or just the middle of nowhere, when I see some weirdo walking along the road at 1 in the morning, because I'm out, when I used to go bigfooting all the time, I was out all night. I would nap it up, then I'd have my steak dinner. I had this tradition where I would get a good steak, cook up a good steak, eat my steak dinner, and I don't eat a lot of red meat either. But when I went Bigfooting, I'd eat a steak, you know. And then I'd cook it. I had this special way I cook it with the spit that I would get from the area. I would cut a twig and I would hold it over the fire, and I would create my spit where it had the power to hold the steak any way you want, upside down, because the spit I made was spring loaded. And I would cook my steak, and I'd ride my motorcycle around, or drive my car around, or I'd walk around. Usually I wanted to cover a little more distance, so I'd try to use my motorcycle. And occasionally I'd see someone walking along the road, and they were never Sasquatches, but, you know, you'd look at them and there'd be just something a little off about them. And that's how this guy was in front of my house, just a little off, you know. And when you're around the supernatural, you get a vibe. But I got to say, in all honesty, that I did not think in supernatural terms when I came in and started talking to my fiance. She's the one who said, "Oh, he's representing the house. They don't want us to move. The spirits don't want us to move." In fact, it makes me a little weird. Now I'm realizing I'm saying this in the house. So that's probably not the best, but.
Well, so he wasn't exactly a man in black, like a traditional guy with shades on and
Oh,
50s
no,
attire.
no.
Right.
You know, I have my theory about the men in black. You know, I think they're phasing that out. I don't think they're wearing, because I had a men in black encounter when I was 6 or 7 in this haunted ranch house I grew up in. You know, and that was a typical men in black, although the hat was different, but everything else was the same, except the suit was just filthy, just filthy. I mean, the white shirt was just filthy, you know, and stunk. But it was a black suit with a thinnish tie, not too thin, but some sort of tie. I don't know. I was 6 or 7. I can't remember. Maybe 8. But so I've had, you know, I think that's the only men in black, actual black suit I've ever seen. But you know, I never thought of that being an MIB. Even up in where, you know, I became interested in MIBs a little bit later in life, you know, when I was in my late 40s, and, you know, I bought a few books on it. I just couldn't bring myself to read them though. But I never thought of that guy as an MIB. And then I was writing it up for this book I'm writing, and I was like, crap, that guy's just a prototypical MIB, you know. And why wouldn't that occur to me? He's wearing a black suit, you know, with a white shirt. But it never occurred to me. I never thought of him as an MIB. So, but it's my theory, though, that these days, you know, an outfit like that, first of all, the whole point of that outfit was so people would, you know, not pay him a lot of heed, kind of let them get free passes through our society without calling attention to themselves. If they wear a black suit like that now, who wears that? John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd and the MIBs, and who else? I mean, no one dresses that way much. So that's not how they dress now, in my opinion, unless they're trying to, like, just tweak you and say, hey, ha ha ha, I'm an MIB. And that's a different kind of mission than, say, just sort of like trying to pass through society unnoticed and about their business or whatever. You know, if they dress up in a black suit now, it's to terrify or disorient, which isn't often their modus operandi. You know, often they're just doing other things. And, you know, I've read plenty of accounts of Bigfoots doing the same kind of activity. If they didn't look like Bigfoots, and you put a briefcase in their hand, they'd be a business executive. I mean, these things don't go through the forest necessarily, like giant oversized hominids, you know, that are looking for their dinner in the forest. I mean, sometimes they have a business-like way about them.
Well,
I've only had one cut and dried sighting of a Sasquatch. And I didn't see it in those, you know, it was at the top of a giant quarry. So it was just looking down at myself and another individual who was Native American. So I've never really seen a Bigfoot up close. to tell you the truth. I've seen what I thought were some Bigfoots going through the forest at times, but never. And I've heard them very close, but I only had one cut and dried sighting, and it wasn't even a brilliant sighting. I mean, it was like the sun had gone down, had just gone down. It was behind the creature, so it was more of a silhouette, but it lasted for like 20 minutes. So the length of it was a long time, but I couldn't make out the details of its face or anything.
The last time that you started writing, let's take cultists, for example, or maybe even cowslip. Now you're in the midst of writing another book. I've heard from other authors before, just the writing will bring out the paranormal. So do you ever pay that any mind, that you're awakening something?
Oh yeah, absolutely. After I had that Men in Plaid sighting, I couldn't think or talk about it. I mean, it wasn't as though I couldn't remember it. I mean, I could remember it fine, but I didn't think about it. I just didn't, And after that, when I tried to go Bigfooting, I'd get really nauseated, and I couldn't Bigfoot for years. I'd just throw up, and I only really had the nauseated feeling though when it felt as though there was activity. If I heard some vocalizations or branch breaking or chest thumping or stomping or or just the feeling like because I was going to some spots that were just red hot in terms of the historical amount of sightings there and things I'd experienced there. I didn't just go anywhere. I mean, I went to the quintessential spots and Portland is just surrounded by them. If you get out an hour and a half out of the city, man, you can be in some really, really hairy spots, literally and figuratively. And if you're like me, I mean, I have an encyclopedic memory in mind for these things. So, I researched it meticulously, both in speaking with experts, in internet research, and that was back in the golden age of the internet when you could actually find what you were looking for, as opposed to now when it's buried under a mountain of detritus, sometimes on purpose. And so, man, I'll tell you, if you wanted to find that data on the internet back then, I mean, there was a surprising amount up. It was going up pretty fast, but there wasn't anything to cover it up. There wasn't literally like pages and pages on Google. Like I'll do some of the same searches for stuff that interested me then, and I'll end up on page 20 of Google to find the damn thing. Back then you could find it on page 1. So Bigfooting was way easier then, because now it's compounded by sometimes, like, obviously, I don't know with Bigfoot, but with other things that you're looking for, like I like conspiracy theories too. Cliff calls me Conspiracy Kirk. All the guys on Finding Bigfoot, they always called, that was my nickname.
Right.
So I don't really like the term conspiracy, but there are other things too where I get the feeling like, yeah, this has been purposely buried. I don't really get that feeling too much with a lot of the Bigfoot stuff, but the problem is now that everyone and their mother is Bigfooting. Back then, it was very rare. There weren't very many of us then.
Okay, let's leave the topic of Bigfoot here for a second, and let's go back to some photographs that you sent me from the Still House Bar in Oregon City. Now, some of the photos that you get, that you take with your phone, are inside the bar, and since you're on Strange Brow right now, it might be fitting to talk about the photographs of the goblins inside the glass. Talk about those photos.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because I was thinking about that just like a couple nights ago on Clyde Lewis. I've hung out with Clyde several times. We're friends. We're acquaintances really, but he knows me. He's got cultists back behind his desk, and we've hung out several times after some events. We've had dinner with other mutual friends, and he had a guest on there that was he somehow was like bending light rays from the sun with metal or something like that and photographing it, and so my theory is that modern photography In some ways, modern photography is like old school photography, like the daguerreotypes and stuff like that. It's the way I look at it is that we live in a spectrum of reality where things are neat and ordered as they seem to be, because most people are helping to order them with their expectation of order. But when you go outside, whether or not you got an electron microscope, a bent piece of metal, and a digital camera, or you're photographing whiskey glasses in a historical pub that's perched over the river where you know McLaughlin himself, came up that river and wanted to make that the capital of Oregon right there. I mean, it's a historical place right there. Then there's this giant derelict, you know, what do you call it, paper pulp factory down there, and it's just all these hulking masses of. It's like something out of Mothman prophecies, man. I mean, it's a strange area, and in many ways, the Scottish love it for that reason, because Scotland's kind of like that too. I mean, you go to some of these erstwhile cities that used to be heavy industry, and now they're not, and everything's falling to ruin. And those things don't fall to ruin easily. You got to dynamite them. We're talking buildings that are, with huge, thick concrete walls as thick as a house, And so it's a historic area, and that bar itself was, I'm told, home to some tragedies happened there. Some people died. There again, I don't think it's the spirits of the dead people that is haunting the pub, but rather things attracted to that suffering in the past. When you've got intense suffering and deaths, that's just like blood in the water for shark. I mean, and these things move through time like sharks move through water. So, but the point is, though, that I was not thinking about it. You can't think about it. If you want to capture something, you're better off just taking a ton of pictures like I do, and then once in a great while, you'll get something, and that's what these were. And I had some unmistakable imagery that just didn't look normal and looked goblin-esque. And I showed it to the bartender, and she freaked out. She's like, "Oh my God, can you text those to me? I got to show those to the owner." And I know the owner, Mick. I mean, he's a friend of mine. So back then I didn't know him as well. But Mick's he's a former cardiologist. I mean, the guy's a brainiac, and now he owns a historic pub, one of the best whiskey pubs in America, hands down. And so I get these images in there, and they're very strange. Some of them look kind of monkey-like, and others look almost dog-like, and then others look like something out of one of those, wingnut films. One of Peter Jackson's, visions for when he brought Tolkien's works to life. So another one looks like a giant fat man touching his chin, and
Well,
and some of them look like cartoons. Like there's one where this fetus thing it starts swirling, and then there's a giant leg in it, and it looks kind of like a cartoon. And you think to yourself, well, I'm looking around the pub later, like a month later, thinking, well, when I finally discovered what was on the photographs, I was like, I went back to try to know what the hell is something being reflected from the TV, or like what could cause these strange images, but I couldn't figure it out, what it could be.
Describe how you took the photos, though, as far as what you were doing. How were you aiming the camera?
Well, now I went through a time. I've never really liked to drink very much. In fact, I'm kind of like, even though I'm a bit overweight and I love food more than I love alcohol, which has been the bane of my existence in later years. I've got to ease off and go on diets. But so I have a sweet tooth, really. I love ice cream. I love sweets. I love a good juicy steak, or a good piece of fish, or I just love food, So for me, I just don't really have an attraction to drinking a lot, But I got to it where I was being paid to be a whiskey critic, and I was being paid at a very expensive bottle of whiskey. And sadly, I was probably making more money per hour doing that than anything else I've ever written, which is very sad for a guy like me. I mean, it's nice to be making money from writing whiskey reviews, but I would like to be making money from my passion, which is writing novels or writing memoirs or something like that. And so now at that time, the still house had some extremely rare bottles, and I came across one that I just couldn't believe. It's from a mothballed distillery, and the Rosebank. And you just don't come across Rosebanks much because mothballed means the distillery wasn't just closed but destroyed, demolished, demoed, as they say here. They say mothballed over there in Scotland. And that means the stills were taken and either melted for scrap or taken by another distillery and used. That often happens. And Rosebank made some. It was a lowland whiskey, so most of the lowland whiskeys were triple distilled, and really not that remarkable to me because when you triple distill a whiskey, that means the effluvium goes up through the pipe as mist, condensation, and then is condensed down the spout, and then that process is done 3 times. It takes a lot of the character out of the whiskey, but it makes it smoother. So if you just don't really appreciate the eccentricities of a single malt Scotch, then the triple distilled stuff was popular in like 100 years ago, 80 years ago. It fell out of favor, and a lot of those distilleries down in the lowlands of Scotland went out of business. And Springbank remained. You've still got a couple down there, 3 or 4, a couple really making some good ones, a couple not. And so I was just in love with the Springbank, and it sounds a lot to pay, like 18, 19 bucks for a glass of whiskey. That sounds like an awful lot. But there were people around the country that would have paid 3 times that for what I was tasting. And so I just couldn't stop going back. I'd save my money up. I'd go back for some more, like just one glass. I was there actually with what I call a lightning rod. She was an ex-girlfriend of mine, Diane, who just, you meet these women. I find, generally speaking, that women attract more supernatural stuff than men. And this woman, she has like zero interest in the supernatural, but man, she attracts a lot of. And she was there right next to me when I was taking these pictures, and I don't glaze over that lightly. It could have been her presence, because the Bigfoots really like her. I've been Bigfooting with her and had some amazing things happen, vocalizations. I had one come right at the picnic table in the dark, and she jumped up to get something out of the car, and it literally had to back pedal away from her boomingly in the substrate of the forest loam that's kind of semi-hollow in that campsite. So it boomed. I was just, oh my God, we both were freaked out by that. But anyway, so she attracts spirit activity and Bigfoot activity. And so I was just basically photographing this Rosebank just lovingly. Like the label, I just loved the bottle and the color of it and the way it caught the light. And I was holding it up to the light. And so that's what I was doing. I was photographing this Rosebank that was so rare and so wondrous of an elixir that and I was so happy too. I was just so, because it's not like I really even it's like when I get to the end of a glass of Rosebank like that, it's not like I want another one. I mean, I enjoy just savoring it, a little tiny sip of just tickle the tongue a little with this amazing expensive Scotch, So yeah, so that's what I was doing when I got the images.
So in a way, you're kind of using your whiskey glass as kind of like a scrying whiskey.
No, I was just holding it up and trying to capture. I like photographing. I ever since cell phones got so good with the good cameras in them, I've just really enjoyed. And the way you can delete images, take a bunch and just keep a few. I mean, I was just having fun trying to photograph the whiskey, and I was planning on writing a review on it for my own. At that time, I had my own private blog. It was called the Whiskey Kirk, and so yeah.
But you actively use your smartphone to try to bring about uh, manifestations on your phone. I've seen you do it.
Not manifestations. Like I said, the spectrum, when you get into the electron microscope or you get to the daguerreotype, both ends of the spectrum of what you call normalcy, then strange things begin to happen, and you begin to capture imagery and things and possibly living creatures that you wouldn't otherwise be able to photograph. You know, I also experiment with swirling. I'll stand out in a field that has a lot of activity, and I'll just start swirling around and try and see what'll show up in my picture. I haven't really gotten very much that way, but I just experiment all the time. I'm always trying new things, and these digital cameras just afford all kinds of opportunities. I've come up with all kinds of ways of getting outside the normal spectrum of experience, and it's in that area where you can capture things. I'll do things like I'll photograph a river and juxtapose or turn the images in different directions. Look for the reflections on the water. I mean, there's one area where I was actually told that area by Tom Powell back in like 2001 on the Malala River. Tom helped me a lot just getting started, you know, back in the early 2000s. Like I had already grown up, you know, in a farmhouse with Bigfoot activity on the hill behind it. And the people that bought the house from my parents reported that Bigfoot activity, you know. So it's not as though he helped me get started being around Bigfoot. He just pointed me to some really cool areas where, you know, a lot of these areas too, they hadn't had activity in ages. Like they were like maybe active 10 years earlier and then went dead, which often happens. These places will run hot and cold. And so this particular spot, I took Diane there. Oh my God. Oh, all hell broke loose on that trip. I mean, I'm writing about it, so I don't want to just give it all away, but it was just an incredible experience. I mean, just really one of the kinds of things that just, you know, most people would experience that once in a lifetime. But like, because I constantly put myself, I don't want to say in harm's way, but in the supernatural's way, just constantly doing it intelligently, calculatedly, you know, almost like lying across the threshold of these supernatural portal-esque places and just it was very stupid, really. I mean, you know, at the time I just couldn't stop myself from doing it. I was fascinated by the supernatural, and, you know, we're just kind of mesmerized into thinking, oh, something supernatural happened. Isn't that great? You don't really weigh it in your mind and think, well, is that a healthy thing to be around? I mean, like the common sense people had, just maybe like our grandparents' generation, they had a lot more common sense about the supernatural than a lot of us have, you know, because they were going on the bearings of their grandparents, and their grandparents were far wiser than they about the supernatural. So we're actually becoming far more stupid as time goes along in regard to the supernatural. And this whole idea that humanity is on the threshold of some, you know, great awakening, and we're becoming so much more tuned in to the spirituality of the universe, I couldn't disagree more. I think that we're losing a lot of the baggage of the dogmas that were built into the churches to keep people from staying in touch with the spiritual. And that could be good in some ways, but then we're also throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and all the positive spiritualization with angels, angelic beings, love, truth, life, universal consciousness, all these things. We're not getting closer to those generally. We're getting farther, and we're using terms like the universe and lots of pantheism. Oh, it's, material objects, having spiritual forces, and then mistaking harmful spirits for good ones and believing everything they tell you. And it's like, I think we're actually we're de-evolving, like the band Devo sang about. I think we're devolving. We're not becoming more enlightened. We're becoming less enlightened. And whatever we are gaining in certain directions. We're losing far more than we're gaining. It's like, just imagine being on a treadmill and slowing down. We're being pulled backwards, in my opinion. We're not becoming more enlightened. And no one wants to hear that. It's a downer. But I'm not the kind of guy where if I have a friend and like maybe I'll give you an example. So my fiance Risa knows a lot about medicines, and I went to hang out with a friend, up north, another state, and she noticed that he seemed in need of a certain vitamin, by the way he was walking and stuff. And most people would never stick their necks out and mention that to a friend that they hadn't seen in years. Because no one wants to be told they need a vitamin because they have a deficiency or whatever, and or maybe they're eating too much meat and maybe suffering from gout or whatever. That's not the kind of thing most people would say. They'll actually sacrifice their friend's well-being because they know their friend will like them less for having said it. But I'm the kind of person where, whether it's society or the individual, I have to try to help. That's what I'm up to. I would always tell myself when I was going to these Bigfooting areas or being around, I'm doing this for society. I want to learn. And I would even say it to these creatures. I'm here to try to help. Can you help? Can you point me in the direction that will help society, that will help us? The earth is being destroyed, you know? And so that's why I see my adventures and my religion, which is trying to make sense of the supernatural, is my religion. It's built on the backs of other religions. It's built on the backs of Native Americans and their wisdom, and that's been destroyed. A lot of that wisdom. It's built on the backs of all kinds of other things, but it's also built on my own back, my own suffering. And I was just a lot of my motivation for doing all these things. It wasn't just simple intrepidity or curiosity, or it was literally trying to make the world a better place. That was I would say that was well over half of my motivation in everything I've done in the supernatural.
And we're here with author Sig Sigurdson, author of Cultus and Cowslip. Sig, if people wanted to get a hold of you and email you about their own encounters or ask you some questions about your upcoming book, which you're kind of tight-lipped about, which I understand, but is there a way people can reach out to you?
Oh, I used to have a website. I'm kind of woodshedding right now. What I would say is if they could contact you, you could point them toward me. I mean, you've done that before,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be great. I'm trying to think if I have so many email addresses. I'm trying to think of one I could use. I probably have like 15, and I can't remember most of
Well,
them.
just
But
shoot me a message at strangebrowradio at
yeah,
gmail.com. If you want to speak to Kirk in depth about something, I'll put you in contact with him. The final note here is the question I have to ask you is there's a little bit of trepidation, a warning, investing too much time and a price to pay for the individuals here physically interacting with the non-physical. Talk to the audience about that and your experience with the price to pay messing with this too much.
well, I think a couple of things kept me alive because I put myself in harm's way too much, and I risked too much. I went to really dangerous spots, and I did dangerous things there that attracted activity. I'm in no way a warlock or anything like that. I was raised as a Christian Scientist, and whereas I'm not thrilled about some things about organized religion, that one notwithstanding, um, I do feel a strong connection to kind of an ancient form of uh, being tied into goodness and angels and true light, not light, not darkness calling itself light, but real light and goodness and what some people might call God, other people might call the universe, other people might call universal consciousness, whatever. And so I think that when things really went south, figuratively, when I was in a hot spot and the activity got really bad, I would pray. And I think that whether or not you're a Muslim or a Christian or a Jewish person or a Buddhist or whatever, I really do think that there are positive things about all those religions. And if you focus on the goodness and not the chains and not the dogma and not the darkness that has been inbuilt into it over the centuries and millennia, then you can really tie into some good things that can help you, and your faith and belief can actually protect you around these kinds of creatures, because most of them, in my opinion, are not benevolent. you know especially in these kinds of spots. And I think that if you're a supernaturalist, a paranormalist, if your science friends call you woo woo, and you actually feel that a little insulted by that, which you should feel, if you're serious about it, then I think that precautions need to be taken. And I think that you shouldn't believe everything you're told by spirit beings, because they have a completely different set of priorities, and what benefits them probably won't benefit you necessarily. And that's an unpopular thing to say, and it doesn't hold true for angels. So, but most people don't have the ability to be able to tell the difference between an angel and a spirit being. I don't think of an angel as a spirit being. I think of it as a direct emanation of goodness, from the source. So that's different, and you can have spirit beings. There are good and evil human beings too. And, I think spirit beings can be like that. But if you're a cow, how many good ranchers are there if you're being raised for beef? Just ask yourself that, think in those terms. And then get back to me, because if you're a cow and you think the rancher is looking out for your best interests, well, it's true to a point. That rancher is make sure you have enough to eat, because if you're skinny, you can't butcher skin and bones. There's no money to be made. There's going to be a nice pasture. It's going to be kept clean for the most part. A nice fresh grass, and maybe a nice big pasture to walk in, a barn in the winter, some hay, and you might get a false sense of security. You might think, well, that rancher's not so bad after all. And okay, some people are telling me that, his cattle dog there's some kind of a conspiracy going on with the cattle dog and the rancher to herd us around. I think that's not true. He's just a nice guy, And I unfortunately, a huge number of paranormalists and, people like that, they approach it like that. And they actually revere these beings as gods, and probably for good reason, because they want to be revered as gods. A lot of them, they want that reverence, because that reverence, benefits them. But I tend to think that if you're working for a higher purpose, and that higher purpose is actually you're really trying to benefit humanity. I mean, for goodness sakes, the human race has been utterly smashed in the dirt throughout most of its history of organized civilization. We're not evolving. We're being smashed into the mud over and over and over again. And we're being smashed in the mud by forces we don't understand. Orchestrated wars, orchestrated financial servitude, government, all kinds of things that on the surface they're designed to look healthy and good. But if you really look at the net result of them, come on, our planet's being destroyed. Most of the bees are gone. Is it all our fault? No, it's not all our fault. We've been put into a prison cell, so we have to work practically all of our waking life just to make ends meet, and that isn't natural. And so, no, we're not killing the bees through just trying to get by like that. The bees are actually, I think, are being purposely destroyed, not as individual insects, but I think the earth is being destroyed on purpose. So now what would that benefit? Well, that's part two.
Is it fair to say that you think most people are just plain asleep, and that you're more awake? You kind of broken out of the matrix here and see a lot of slave mentality?
Well, when you find yourself in a position where you've rubbed up against things that are different from most people, you've put yourself in situations that most people would run from for their very lives, and you've done it over and over and over again over the years, and you've tried to communicate with these beings for the best of intentions, not for sensationalistic reasons, like a bunch of people sitting around the table with a planchette, but you're really trying to make the world a better place, genuinely, benevolently trying to do that. And then you've been consistently maligned, in the workplace, out of the workplace, made fun of. Um, I find nothing more ironic than a bunch of people that have devoted much of their lives to researching Bigfoot and Sasquatches to, having a narrow point of view about another kind of research, that they believe is in the sciences and the integrity of the sciences, and yet they're, in my opinion, they're going out and they're researching beings that can read their minds. I mean, how in the hell do you do a priori reasoning with that? I mean, how in the hell do you use a scientific approach to something that knows you're coming, let alone what you're going to do? I mean, it's stupid, it's idiotic, But I would never say that to my friends to their faces. They Most of them will say that a lot of what I do is idiotic, and they'll say it nicely in different terms. But I see a lot of hypocrisy in the bigfooting field, and I just find that to be. I mean, if your fellow Bigfooters draw lines in the sand between woo-woo people that they call woo-woo people, and then our camp, which are the scientists, using cutting-edge technologies and a 500 years worth of brilliance from humanity, instead of realizing the sciences have been shaped for the benefit of the very few ruling classes, and and they're using a bunch of dogma, just like, kind of reminds me of the witch hunts in the Catholic Church. I mean, the sciences. You don't think there are witch hunts these days among scientists that really think for themselves? I mean, come on. So, yeah, I mean, I felt resentment. I've been hurt. My life has been very painful. I mean, I took the hard road. I took the narrow path, and wide is the gate for those that go in there and lead to perdition. I mean, it's like the easy road isn't necessarily the best road. But I got to say, though, that I felt lately like I need to pull back from the supernatural, and I need to really kind of reconnect with angels and goodness and source consciousness, and just really try to surround myself with positivity and forgiveness and love, and not love that gets something, but unselfish, universal love, unconditional love. No one can really do that indefinitely, but little bursts of it when you can muster it, And so even though I've had a lot of my ideas taken from me. I've had things plagiarized. I've had a lot of all the fruits of my labor. I've had a lot of them plucked off the table right in front of me, and then presented and reconditioned, presented in other terms. And my friend Henry Franzoni has had the same problem, and he talks about that. We hung out for the better part of an afternoon and an evening. Late last year. And, so it can be frustrating when, you spend a lot of your time and then you try to share things with friends or whatever, and some of it gets scooped. I mean, it's bound to happen, but it can be frustrating. So yeah, you can feel resentment. I mean, but at the end of the day, you just have to look at, well, what's the net result? I mean, if these people are trying to make the world a better place, then God bless them. I hope they, can take the ball and run with it. So a lot of them aren't, though. A lot of them are trying to just, make money or whatever. And, we all need to make money. There's nothing wrong with making money. But if that's your prime motive, I mean, it's sort of like, if you're trying to do the right thing and along that way you can make a living from it, and not a get rich quick scheme where you're like a multi-millionaire, but just paying the bills, and, then doesn't that benefit society too? If you can eke out a living and actually live in a little house and pay your bills, doing what you love, trying to write about things that make the world a better place, is that really so bad? Is that really materialistic and selfish? So, yeah. So, I mean, does that answer your question?
Well, of course it does. Yeah. No, I wanted to get your perspective on, the idea that there's a price to pay investing yourself in the supernatural. And again, the footsteps of a Sasquatch trackway lead in so many different directions. And each time there's this price to be paid for investing too much time and money and family into looking at it because of the push pull effect beyond it there. I wanted to get your perspective, and you gave it to me. If you want to meet Sig Sigurdson, he will be in attendance at a Strange Brow live event that's going to be coming up on July 12th and 13th. The tickets on sale can be found at strangebrow.com. This is your chance to not only pick Sig's brain on the 12th at a private event that we'll be having, but you can also pick Ron Moorhead's brain of the Sierra Sounds and Joe Hauser of the Montana Vortex, and the aforementioned Tom Powell. We'll also have Kerry Campbell, Energy, Lightworker, and maybe, just maybe, we can talk my friend and girlfriend and sponsor Erin Jackson to join us in this new form that we're going to do. It's called Secrets of the Sasquatch, and the idea behind it is to immerse the audience in this conversation to move the subject matter forward more than it has been previously, because I feel like we're incredibly lacking just based upon laziness and ego. So I'm trying to put a forum together here and have the audience kind of surprise the speakers, because I think most of these speakers feel, um, well, they're separated from the crowd, to be frank. They're behind a podium, first of all, on stage, elevated with a PowerPoint. And I can't think of anything more separate than having, a 60-minute diatribe laid out with hopefully some good audio and video clips. But we've kind of all seen that for the last 25 years, at least I have. So what I would like to do is invite everybody to immerse themselves more in kind of a roundtable format and actually be a part of the discussion here. And I'll have more on those details for the people that attend that, and as well as the speakers. But again, you can find out more about those tickets on sale. That's July 13th, July 12th and 13th, Friday and Saturday. And you can either go the 2-day event, or you can just come for the Saturday fun. And that will be at the Axe and Fiddle. That's a historic pub in Cottage Grove, Oregon. It's 695 East Main Street in Cottage Grove. And talk about a place that has some activity. If you want to be a part of history, stick around at the Axe and Fiddle after hours. There's a good reason to think that that place may be haunted, quite haunted actually. And so we're excited to be able to have an event there and share that experience with everyone. Hey, Sig, thanks for joining us on Strange Brow Radio. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, the Axe and Fiddle, just put in a plug for the Axe and Fiddle. It's actually situated near some area that Toby and I had some success with in terms of witnessing some supernatural stuff, everything from chest thumping, kind of like a big giant tub, to some orb activity. Mm-hmm. Remember that?
Right, and it continues to be active in that area there, and we'll get more into that in April, where we actually doing an overnight with a couple of disc jockeys from 1120 KPNW on the property I took you to, Kirk, and we're going to do a live AM recap of what the overnight was like out in that area. So I look forward to that next month, and we're also going to offer a dowsing class out in the woods and use some copper dowsing tools to look for more than garbage. And so I'll be talking more about that in length at strangebrow.com and our Facebook page. But anyway, I really appreciate you being on here, and we'll have to do it again.
Sounds good, Tobes. Have a good one.
That was author and experiencer Sig Sigurdson. The book Cultus, the other book Cowslip, the future book, huge question mark. He won't tell us, won't tell me. I don't know, maybe his girlfriend knows. Maybe just maybe she'll spill the beans. I doubt it, but you get the idea from the conversation. It's a non-fiction account, which makes it even more interesting. If you got comments about this interview, I'd love to hear them. Go to strangebrowradio@gmail.com, Facebook under the same name, YouTube. You can find us, our live events. We have some tickets for sale. Go to strangebrow.com and tell us what you think. Hey, shoot me an email, strangebrowradio@gmail.com, if you've got some strange brow happenings. Or if you just want to know more about the show, love to hear back from the listening audience. And if you think you'd be a good match for a guest or have guest ideas, this is where you can find us at strangebrowradio@gmail.com. All right, that's our show. Every Monday, we'll be here. And, of course, we will see you in the trees.